You run your hand along the wall of an old farmhouse, and the plaster is cool, smooth, unbroken, and no one has touched it since before you were born. No cracks, no patches, no fresh coat of paint hiding the damage underneath. Just a wall that has stood quiet and perfect for almost 100 years, and I could not explain it, because the drywall in my own house started cracking in under 3 years, and I have repainted it more times than I can count. The Amish family who owned that farmhouse had done neither, not once. And the man standing next to me said his grandfather built it and never came back to fix a thing. I need you to stay with me, because the answer traces back to a Roman named Pliny the Elder, a book he wrote around 77 AD, and a single instruction so simple that when I finally understood it, I felt robbed. And before you tell yourself this only helps people building a brand new home, it does not. What I found works on the walls you already own, with your own 2 hands, and I am going to prove it to you. Let me take you back to that afternoon, because it is where the whole thing started to come apart for me. It was late October, somewhere in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and the light was coming in low and gold through a window with old wavy glass. I remember pressing my palm flat against that wall almost without thinking, the way you touch something to check if it is real. It was cool, not cold, not damp, cool and dry, like the inside of a clay pot. And it was dead silent in that room in a way my house has never been. My walls tick and pop. That wall just held. I asked the old man how often they repainted, and he looked at me like I had asked how often they repainted the sky. They did not repaint, they never had. And that answer made no sense to me, so I did what I always do when something does not add up. I started digging, and what I dug up turned my stomach a little, because it meant everything I had been sold about walls for my entire adult life was, at best, a convenient lie. Here is the first thing that did not fit. That plaster was not the white powdery stuff I grew up with. When I looked close, real close, there were tiny hairs in it. Actual hair, worked right into the surface. And when I scratched at a hidden corner with my thumbnail, it did not crumble into chalk. It was hard, almost like stone. I had spent decades assuming plaster was fragile, the thing that cracks when the house settles, the thing you rip out and replace with a sheet of gypsum board from the hardware store. But this was not fragile at all. This was the toughest interior surface I had ever put my hand on, and it was older than the man who built it could have imagined it lasting. So what was it? It was lime, not gypsum, not drywall, not the modern joint compound we all smear over seams and sand down every weekend. It was lime plaster, the same material human beings used to coat the inside of their homes for thousands of years before somebody decided we needed something cheaper, faster, and deliberately worse. And that word deliberately is what I could not shake. Because the more I learned about lime, the more I realized nobody forgot how to make these walls. Somebody made a choice for us. But I am getting ahead of myself, and I promised I would show you how I got there, one step at a time. The old man told me his family made their plaster in 3 coats. He called them by names I had never heard: the scratch coat, the brown coat, and the finish. And he said the secret was not in the coats at all. It was in the lime, and in how long they let it sit before they ever touched a wall with it. Months, he said. Sometimes a full year. His grandfather kept a pit of it slaking in the ground, covered over, aging like wine, and the older it got, the better it worked. That stopped me cold, because in my world you buy a bag, you mix it, You slap it up the same day and you are done. The idea that the best builders on earth would deliberately wait a year before using their own material that was the first crack in everything I thought I knew. But here is where it got strange, and this is the thread I want you to hold on to all the way to the end. I asked him what happened when the wall did crack, because everything cracks eventually, right? The house shifts, the ground freezes and thaws, the seasons pull everything a little tighter and then let it go. And he smiled and said the wall fixed itself. It fixed itself. That is what he told me. And I laughed, politely, the way you do when an old-timer is pulling your leg. But he was not pulling my leg. And it took me weeks of reading to understand that he had just handed me one of the oldest, most quietly buried building secrets in human history, a wall that heals its own wounds. I did not believe it yet, but I could not let it go, either. So I went looking for where this knowledge came from. And that road led me straight back to ancient Rome. Around 77 AD, a Roman scholar named Pliny the Elder was writing an enormous work called Natural History, 37 volumes trying to capture everything the ancient world knew. And buried in there he writes about lime and how the Romans prepared it for their walls and their monuments. He complains that the builders of his own day were getting sloppy and using lime too fresh. Because there was an old rule, a law by some accounts, that lime had to be aged, slaked, and set aside for 3 years before a plasterer was allowed to touch a public building with it. 3 years. 2,000 years ago, the Romans understood that time was the ingredient, and a Roman named Pliny was already angry that people were cutting the corner. Now sit with that for a second. The walls the Romans built with that aged lime are still standing, not restored, standing. There are Roman lime surfaces you can walk up to today after 2,000 years that are more intact than the drywall in a house built in the 1990s, and the Amish grandfather in Lancaster County, who almost certainly never read a word of Pliny, was doing the exact same thing, aging his lime in a pit in the ground because his grandfather did, and his grandfather before him. The knowledge did not travel through books. It traveled hand to hand, family to family, one careful old man to one careful young one, straight down the centuries while the rest of us forgot. But that only deepened my mystery, because if this material lasts 2,000 years and heals its own cracks, why in the world does nobody use it anymore? Why did I grow up in a house made of a gray sheet that dents if you lean on it wrong? Somebody, somewhere, replaced the best wall we ever invented with one of the worst. And I wanted a name. Let me tell you what lime actually is, because once you understand it, you will never look at your walls the same way again, and you will start to feel the same cold anger I felt. You take limestone, plain, common limestone, the stuff whole mountains are made of. You burn it hot in a kiln, and it drives off the carbon and turns it into what old-timers called quicklime. Then you add water, carefully, because it hisses and boils and throws off real heat, and that turns it into lime putty. That putty is what you age. And here's the beautiful part. The part that took my breath away when I finally understood it. When you spread that lime on a wall and let it dry, it does not just harden and sit there. It slowly, over months and years, pulls carbon dioxide back out of the very air in your room, and it turns back into stone. Read that again. Your wall is not drying. Your wall is turning back into limestone. Right there in your house, breathing in the air and getting harder every single year it stands. The wall I touched in Lancaster County was harder that October afternoon than the day it was made, and it will be harder still when my grandchildren are old. That is not a building material. That is a living surface. When a hairline crack opens up, moisture and air get into it, and there is always a little unreacted lime waiting deep in that plaster. The moisture wakes it up, it reacts, it forms new mineral, and it fills the crack from the inside the same way a scab closes a cut. The Amish grandfather was not exaggerating. His wall really did heal itself, slowly, quietly, year after year, while my drywall just widened its cracks and waited for me to come at it with a putty knife. But therefore I had to ask the question that had been circling me the whole time. If lime does all this last millennia, heals itself, hardens forever, who profits from me not knowing? Because somebody has been selling me the opposite for my entire life, and it was time to follow the money. Here's where the story turns, and here's where I got angry. In 1916, a company called the United States Gypsum Company patented a product they eventually branded as sheetrock drywall, a sandwich of gypsum plaster pressed between two sheets of paper. And the pitch was simple and, I will admit, seductive. It was fast. Where a lime plaster wall took 3 coats and weeks of skilled work and months of aging before that, a drywall panel went up in an afternoon by a crew that barely needed training. After the Second World War, when this country was throwing up millions of houses as fast as hammers could swing, drywall won. Not because it was better, because it was faster and cheaper, and it needed almost no skill. And that is the moment we quietly traded a wall that lasts 2,000 years for a wall that starts failing in 10. Nobody told us that is what we were doing. They told us it was progress. Now here's the part that turns my stomach. A lime wall is finished. It heals itself. It never needs a fresh coat. It lasts longer than the house around it. There is no repeat business in a lime wall, but a drywall house? That is a customer for life. It needs joint compound. It needs sanding. It needs primer and paint every few years because paint is the only skin holding that paper face together. It grows mold in the humidity because it cannot breathe. It crumbles the instant a pipe leaks. Every one of those failures is a sale. Every crack is a trip to the store. The modern wall was not designed to serve you. It was designed to keep you coming back, checkbook in hand, for the rest of your life. And the Amish just opted out. Quietly, they kept mixing lime in pits in the ground while the rest of the country signed up for a lifetime subscription to their own walls. That is why the knowledge survived out there and died out here. Not because it was inferior, because it could not be sold to you twice. But you might be sitting there thinking this is a nice history lesson that has nothing to do with you, because you are not about to tear your house down to the studs and replaster it in lime. And I hear you, so let me turn and talk straight to you now, you, the one in the house that is already built, the one with the drywall and the paint you have redone too many times, because this next part is the part I went looking for specifically for you. And it is the part that changed my own home. And that is the secret behind the self-healing, a truth so buried, so quietly kept, that most of us will never stumble across it on our own. If you want to go deeper into all of this, the lime wash, and dozens of other methods the Amish never stopped using while the rest of us forgot, I put as much of it as I could into a book called Amish Hacks. There is also Deeper Roots and the full collection, Amish Complete, for those who want everything in one place. All the details are in the description below. These are the things I kept wishing someone had written down for me, and now they are written down for you. But let me bring you back to that pit of aged lime, because the next piece of this is the one that finally made everything click for me. You do not need to gut a single wall. You do not need a contractor, a permit, or a crew. What you need is one of the oldest coatings on earth, and you can make it in a bucket. It is called lime wash. Lime wash is lime, that same aged lime putty, or hydrated lime powder you can buy for a few dollars a bag, thinned down with water into something the consistency of milk. You brush it right onto the walls you already have, and as it dries, it does the exact same thing the full plaster does. It pulls carbon from the air and turns to stone, bonding to your wall as a thin mineral skin. It is not paint. Paint is a plastic film that sits on top and traps moisture and eventually peels. Lime wash becomes part of the wall and lets it breathe. Let me tell you what that breathing means in a house you live in. Lime is naturally alkaline, the same reason old-timers whitewash their barns and cellars and dairy rooms. Mold cannot take hold on it. Bacteria struggle on it. For generations, farmers coated the inside of their milk houses with lime wash precisely because it kept things clean and sweet without a single chemical. If you have a damp basement corner that keeps blooming black, a coat of lime wash is one of the oldest answers there is, and it costs almost nothing. Here is how simple it is. You get a bag of hydrated lime Mason's lime type S from any building supply. You wear gloves and eye protection because wet lime is strong and it will burn your skin, and I want you safe. You mix it slowly into water until it looks like thin cream. Some folks add a handful of salt to help it set. You let it sit overnight if you can. Then you dampen your wall with a wet brush, and you paint the lime wash on thinner than you think, because the magic is in the layers. It goes on nearly translucent and dries lighter and brighter over the next day as it turns to stone. You do 2 or 3 thin coats, and when you are done, you have a wall surface that breathes, resists mold, softens the light in a way no plastic paint ever will, and costs you maybe $15 or $20 for a whole room. I did it in my own back room first, the one that always smelled a little musty no matter what I did. The smell went away within a week and it has never come back. And every time I walk through that room now, I think about how many hundreds of dollars I spent over the years on paint and primer and mold spray, chasing a problem that a bag of ground-up limestone solved for the price of a sandwich. And that is the thing about this knowledge, it scales down. You do not have to build a farmhouse. You can start with one wall, one bucket, one weekend, and feel the difference under your own hand. But even as I stood there admiring my breathing wall, the central mystery was still sitting there unsolved. Because a thin lime wash is wonderful, but it was not what that old man showed me. His wall was solid lime, inches thick, hard as rock, healing itself for a century. And I still did not know the one thing that made his plaster different from a botched job that falls off the wall in a year. I knew it was lime. I knew it was aged, but I could feel there was one more piece he had not fully spelled out, and it was driving me a little crazy. So I went back, and this time I asked him to show me, not just tell me. He walked me out behind the house to where they mixed, and the first thing I noticed was that the lime they used had been sitting, covered, for the better part of a year, just like he said, a soft, dense putty, smooth as butter, with none of the grit of fresh mix. He scooped some out, and he said the same words his grandfather used. The longer she sleeps, the harder she wakes. Aged lime putty is not just old lime. As it sits under water for months, the tiny particles keep breaking down finer and finer, and the putty gets creamier, stickier, more workable, and far stronger when it finally sets. Fresh lime is weak and short, Year-old lime is silk and steel. That is the difference between a wall that lasts a decade and a wall that lasts a century, and it is completely free. It costs nothing but patience, which is exactly the ingredient our world has none of, and exactly the ingredient the Amish have in abundance. Then he showed me the hair. The little hairs I had seen in that old wall. They mix animal hair, traditionally horsehair, or hog bristle right into the base coats. Not for decoration. The hair is rebar. It knits the plaster together, holds it across its own body while it cures, and stops a small crack from ever running long. It is the exact same idea as the steel mesh in a modern sidewalk, except they figured it out thousands of years before steel, and it works so well those old walls almost never crack in the first place. Reinforcement from a horse's tail? Nobody sells you that at the hardware store. But he was still holding back the last piece. I could feel it, and finally I just asked him flat out, how does it heal itself? And that is when he told me the thing that solved everything, the thing that mainstream builders will never tell you because they cannot bottle it and sell it back to you. Here is the finale. Here is the whole secret. And it comes together from that Amish grandfather's pit and from a laboratory that only proved him right in our own lifetime. For years, scientists could not fully explain why ancient Roman lime structures healed themselves while modern concrete crumbles. Then, in 2023, researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, led by a scientist named Admir Masick, published a study on Roman concrete. And what they found was this. Inside the old Roman lime, there were tiny white lumps, little chunks of unreacted lime that earlier experts had dismissed for a century as sloppy mixing, as a mistake. They were not a mistake. They were the healing system. When water seeps into a crack and reaches one of those lime lumps, the lime dissolves, flows into the crack, reacts with the air and the water, and hardens back into new mineral, sealing the wound. The Romans built self-healing into the wall on purpose, using a hot mixing method that left those precious little seeds of lime scattered all through it, waiting for 2,000 years to do their job. And the Amish grandfather standing in front of me with a scoop of year-old lime putty in his hand was doing the same thing. The aging, the hot lime, the thickness of those 3 coats, all of it leaves living lime buried in the wall. Every wall he ever built is full of tiny sleeping seeds. When a crack opens and the winter damp creeps in, those seeds wake up and stitch the wound shut with fresh stone. The wall does not need him to come back. It was built to take care of itself for longer than any of us will live. That is why he looked at me like I was crazy when I asked how often they repaint. You do not repaint a wall that is quietly rebuilding itself from the inside. That was the answer. That was the thing I could not explain that October afternoon with my palm flat against a 100-year-old wall in the low gold light. It was cool and dry because lime breathes and never traps damp. It was hard as stone because it had spent a century turning back into limestone. It had no cracks because horsehair held it and sleeping lime healed it. And it had never been repainted because it never ever needed to be. Everything I had been sold about walls, the drywall, the joint compound, the endless paint, the lifetime of repairs, all of it existed because somebody in 1916 found a way to sell me a wall over and over instead of a wall that lasts forever. The knowledge was never lost. It was written down by Pliny 2,000 years ago. It was proven again by MIT in our own decade. And it was kept alive without any of that by families who simply never stopped doing it right, who kept a pit of lime aging in the ground while the rest of us signed up for a lifetime of walls that fail on schedule. They preserved it not in a library but in their hands, and now it is in yours. So here is what I want you to do, and you can start this week. You do not need to replaster your house. Start with the lime wash. Buy the bag of Type S lime, mix your milk-thin coat, protect your skin, and bring one wall back to life: the damp corner, the musty back room, the basement that never smells right. Watch it stop growing mold. Feel it go hard and bright over the following days as it turns to stone in your own home. And know that you are doing the exact thing farmers and builders did for thousands of years before someone convinced us it was old-fashioned. If you ever do go further, if you patch a wall or coat a cellar in real lime plaster, let your lime age, mix in the fiber, and lay it on in coats. Give it the one ingredient the whole modern world forgot how to give: time. Because here is what you really recovered today. It was never just about walls. It was proof that the thing they called progress was sometimes just a quieter way of keeping you dependent, of turning something that should last forever into something you rent from the store for the rest of your life. You just took one of those things back. A wall that heals itself. A surface that outlives its builder. A secret hiding in plain sight in a limestone quarry, and a Roman book, and an Amish grandfather's pit in the ground. And that is who you are. If you have watched me this far, you are not the kind of person who accepts that everything has to break on schedule so somebody can sell you the fix. You are the kind who runs a hand along an old wall, feels that something does not add up, and refuses to let it go until you understand it. You and I are the same that way. That is why you are still here. So tell me one thing down in the comments, because I read them and I want to know. Have you ever touched an old plaster wall in a farmhouse, an old church, a grandparent's house, and felt how different it was, cool and solid and alive, from the walls we live with now? Tell me where you were and what it felt like. Just write it. I felt it, and here is where. I want to hear your story, because every one of you who remembers is proof this knowledge is not dead. And if you want to keep pulling these things back out of the dark with me, the methods they quietly erased, the tricks the Amish never gave up, then come with me. This is not about a channel. It is about a handful of us refusing to let the old, honest ways disappear while we still have time to save them. Subscribe and stand with the ones who are recovering what was taken. Because next time, I am going to show you the reason the Amish keep their cellars dry and their food good through the whole winter without a single kilowatt of electricity, and it starts with something most people throw straight in the trash. You are going to want to be here for that one. Before you go, let me tell you where this goes next. Inside the Plain Living Circle, I walk you through the full 3-coat lime plaster method, mix to finish, on your own walls. And you can ask me your own questions there. I answer you myself, not some machine. You belong with the plain living folks already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel any time with one click. Come join me.